Well, hello there, everybody. How are you doing today? Long time no podcast, huh? Sorry about that. Kind of enjoying a little bit of time off, a little bit of vacation time with my spouse, and it's been kind of nice. Getting as much sleep as I can possibly want. It's a luxury, really. How life changes when you just get enough sleep every night. And it's been a couple of weeks now of that, so it's been just so pleasant. What can I say? Anyway, so yeah, it's true. I have been shirking my podcast duties over the past couple of weeks, but I'm sure you understand. And I don't know, I guess it's one of those things, when you do a podcast, it's suggested, by the various platforms that you can release your podcast on, that you try to be as consistent as possible, with your podcast. And, that's not always the most convenient thing for me. So, I apologize for that, but I kind of honestly feel like that my audience kind of understands that, the podcasts that I have released have not been forced. I don't have to release one, every Tuesday or something. I'm keeping it real, like when I feel like I have something I want to talk about, I'll go ahead and make a podcast, and so far so good, right? I don't think it's such a big deal, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, so over the past couple years or so, I've been watching and listening to a lot of like the Joe Rogan podcast, and listening to a lot of different comedians talking about their careers as stand-up comics. And it kind of gave me the idea of this podcast that I'm going to give you today, because there's been this weird kind of strange trend in the United States lately, probably over the past year or two, of this strange kind of wave, I guess I would call it, of censorship. There seems to be an active, silencing of people who have challenging ideas or, challenging opinions, things that are not popular, or things that people like, or at least a certain portion of the population do not want to hear. This whole idea of speech and compelled speech and the arguments that come up, and the, like I said, the censorship and the reaction from people like Antifa and all that kind of stuff. It's like we live in this really strange time, at least here in America, where there is like this wave of censorship. And honestly, I do kind of think of this stuff on my own. Okay, I mean, I am a critical thinker, so I pay attention to what's happening in the zeitgeist, and the spirit of the times, and what kind of things are being discussed, and what's front and center, right? And like I was saying, it's through things like the Joe Rogan podcast, because he's a stand-up comic. He has a lot of comedians on his show, and I've never been the kind of person who would, pay to go see a comedy show in a club or something. I've never done that. Not that I'm really against it or something. I like comedy, but it just was never something that was very important to me. But I realize now, after having listened to the Joe Rogan podcast for a while, and his interviews with various comedians and stuff, his friends that he invites onto his show, that, what stand-up comedy is actually something very important to culture And I never really saw it that way, but I am starting to now, that it's really not about being funny, really. It's about freedom of speech. That's what comedy is really about, I think. And freedom of speech is not something that can be taken lightly or disregarded readily. You know, you have to think about that. I guess I do, right? I have to think about that. We have to think about that. That what these comedians are doing a lot of the time is kind of pushing the limits and pushing the boundaries of what is socially acceptable to say. And that's a pretty important thing. You know, it's when you think about the history, at least in the United States, of famous comedians, almost all of them were really famous because they had, in one way or another, challenged the public. And of course, it's all woven in this tapestry of laughter and humor, and kind of like holding up a mirror to society sometimes, and getting a good laugh out of it, and pointing out the faults and the flaws of human beings, right? But that's not something that should be taken lightly. It's a very important exercise in freedom of speech. And now, we live in a time, at least according to these famous comedians, we're living in a time where what they are allowed to say is slowly being narrowed down, slowly their right to speak openly and freely in the public sphere, like on a stage in a comedy club or whatever, is being very, very slowly eroded and diminished. And it's happening very gradually, but it's still happening. And I can't help but think about that and what that actually means. Because when you go back in history, especially to the early to mid 1930s, when the Nazi Party was starting to get a foothold in Europe, one of the first things they did when they were shutting down the society, let's say, when they were putting the clamp down on, what up until that point had been considered normal social existence, one of the first groups that they went after were intellectuals first, the educators, the artists, the performers, the comedians, the music. This was the first wave of that shutdown, and I learned that a long time ago, and I've always kind of remembered it because I am a musician, an artist, an intellectual, or whatever you want to say. I mean, I do work and trade in that realm, so I always kind of remembered it, right? Never imagining for a second that it would ever be something that I would really have to be concerned about here in the United States. But through the passing of time, here we are at this stage in our democracy and in our republic where dissent is being shut down. You go onto YouTube and you find any topic that's controversial in the United States right now, like the Sandy Hook shootings, or the flat earth movement, things that are maybe conspiratorial, challenging the the 9/11 attacks. Is it a conspiracy? Was it an inside job? And the moon landings, were they real? Were they fake? And what you see now, thanks to Google and YouTube, are these Wikipedia definitions attached to these videos that may be, on the fringe, conspiratorial or whatever, there's like this insistence that there is a truth to this, and here is the truth, and then this video you're about to watch is not that. It's not true. It's a figment of someone's overactive imagination or something. And it doesn't seem like a very big deal. In fact, now it's kind of like something that I kind of giggle about or laugh about when I see it. Like, oh, brother, that's so ridiculous. But I think it's a little bit more serious than that. I think that what we're seeing is a gradual, systematic shutdown of dissent, controlled speech in the United States, like what you cannot say and what you can say. And it doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you're on. It does not matter. It affects everybody the same way. And I don't know, it causes me to worry a little bit for the future of the First Amendment in the United States. Now, when you really think about it, the framers of the United States Constitution must have felt very strongly about freedom of expression and freedom of speech, because they made it the First Amendment of the Constitution. They made it the first point that they wanted to address when they were putting together the ideas of this new country they wanted to start, this new experiment called America. And what does that mean? Stop for a moment and consider, like, why that must have been the case. Like, you had this group of individuals that were coming together to form a new government, okay, a new republic, a new democracy. And the first thing on the list was the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression. That was what they wanted to address first. So think about that. Like, what had they endured in the past that made that such a priority to them? And isn't it strange, isn't it odd that we are living in a time when that very right, that very important right, is being challenged? I don't know. It has probably very serious implications for all people, not just in America, but for all democracies or republics all over the world, all societies, all cultures, when you are not free to express your opinion or a redress of your grievances or anything like that, when you're being shut down. And it's different now than it has been in the past, because we're not talking about, some union leader who was standing up in front of a group of steel workers and expressing his opinion and being shut down or something, or anything like that. We're talking about just normal, average, everyday people who are making content for YouTube or Twitter or Snapchat or any of those things, being shut down, being removed from the platform, because of things that they said. And I don't know. It speaks a lot to the future, I think, at least the near future, about where we're headed and like what kind of issues we're going to have to struggle against, in the near future. But I do think that in the long run, that the right to speak openly and freely will be returned back. I do think so. I think it will be returned back to its original state eventually. It may take a while, and there may be a lot of, turmoil and controversy, between that time and now, but I think it will eventually come back to its original form. But in the meantime, we have to kind of, one, observe, we observe what's happening, especially on the internet. It's a way for everybody to be connected and for everybody to read, things and hear things and see things like in the common space. The internet, as of now, at least for the time being, is a common space. It's a public space. So I don't know about you, okay, but for me, one of the best things about the internet, and there's not too many great things, but one of the best things about the internet in general, and, certain platforms, I guess, okay, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, all those things, Twitter, is that we do have access to several different opinions or several different ideas, and that's a really fantastic thing. I mean, we may look back on this time and go, wow, we really did have it good for a while there, until they started putting the clamp down on various individuals or whatever. It's a pretty important issue right now. So it brings us to this idea of censorship, and the role that censorship plays in society. And, I've spoken on this issue before in the past, that episode, Custody of the Senses, where I was kind of talking about self-censorship, like the responsibility that at least I feel I have toward you, so I don't need somebody to tell me what I should or should not say. I like to think anyway that I'm a pretty good judge of that myself. And, I should be old enough and mature enough to get there on my own, especially if I have any real respect for you, okay, and what I'm expressing to you, what you're taking into your ears and into your mind, through my mouth and what I'm saying, right? But now we're talking about something else, and it's really, at least as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of really playing out in a very obvious way right now. I don't know if it's because we're like really just pre-elections here in the United States, and as you may or may not know, the political climate in the United States is so outrageous right now that it's kind of hard to believe sometimes that things are the way they are in the United States right now. I mean, it is really a very different country than it was when I was growing up. And I can honestly say I was never really the kind of person who paid too much attention to politics, but there's no denying it now. I mean, it's really a strange time. And these flags that are appearing on YouTube videos now, these Wikipedia definitions, are just like a small first step, and of course there's story after story of different YouTube content creators being removed from YouTube, being shut down. Google searches are being impaired for certain people. In some cases, different content creators are really kind of losing empires that they have built around their YouTube channel and around their social media presence. There's people who make a living off that stuff, and they're losing their ability to make a living simply because of something that they've said or done. And let's pause for a moment and think about that. Now, along with this idea of censorship on YouTube and Google or whatever, certain individuals being omitted from the club, certain people who are not allowed to participate anymore, because of something they said. At the same time, we have this situation where there's kind of like at least as far as I can tell, like the decimation, the almost complete and total destruction of the American press, the news, the newspapers, the magazines, the sources for information about current events and things like that. I mean, there's so much confusion now. And I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, fake news and, this is real and this is fake. I don't really have a way of knowing, what is real and what is fake. I mean, maybe we never really have, okay? Got to concede to that. Maybe it's not a new thing. It's always been this way, but, I just wasn't aware of it or something. Okay, that's possible. But I see now, this scenario where the American press is being so chopped up and, misquoting and no reliable sources for information. So nobody really knows what's really going on. It's very difficult to discern what is true and what is false. And I suppose, what I do is I'll take as much information as I can about a specific issue, and then kind of weigh out all the different opinions or whatever and try to figure out, at least in my best estimation, what's probably really going on. But it's almost impossible to do most of the time. So I wanted to talk about, in lieu of all this information that I just gave you, the things I was talking about, censorship and all that, it brings me to this other issue. Now, I've talked about this issue before, and what I'm talking about is the issue of the flat earth. Okay, whether the earth is flat or the earth is a sphere. Okay, and I understand that people don't really want to, even think about that or talk about that, I guess. It's like, it's so out there, it's so ridiculous, right? Well, today I want to talk about the flat earth movement, but not whether it's real or not about whether the earth is flat or sphere shaped, but what I do want to talk about is what people probably don't realize about this quote unquote flat earth movement, okay, is how rapidly it's growing, okay? So I don't want to talk about the politics of it. I don't want to talk about the science of it, because I really have to kind of try to remain neutral on an issue like that, things like that come up, because I want to be able to talk about it openly and honestly. And if I'm going to do that, or at least try to do that, I'm going to have to try to remain neutral, and listen to both sides of the arguments or whatever and all that. But it's really kind of amazing to me to watch, because I pay attention to the flat earth movement and what it means, because I see it as a very serious issue, not because the earth might be flat or sphere shaped, but because the questions are being asked, and it's interesting to me because I see a lot of the time these flat earthers are posing questions to credible scientists that are kind of knocking them back on their heels a little bit. They don't really know how to deal with it or really how to answer it. So yeah, now a couple years in to the flat earth movement and its existence or whatever, you have, a handful of scientists that are just now, responding with, challenges or, proof or whatever to their belief that the earth is a sphere, right? But what is more interesting to me is just how fast and how widespread the growth is of the flat earth movement. I mean, we all as a culture on this planet have to pause for a moment and just think about that. I don't think a lot of people are really aware of it, because it's kind of, information that is concealed for the most part. You don't really see a lot of it or hear a lot of it really, because, Google and YouTube are actively trying to shut this thing down, okay? And, their intentions may be good or whatever, I don't know. I don't know. I'm a spectator in all this, I don't have any real information or anything, but I do see what I see, and I come to conclusions that I come to. And I can tell you, I saw a documentary film, a recently made documentary film about the Flat Earth movement and the current state of that movement. And I was shocked a little bit to see their statistics and their numbers and growth and the number of people on the planet. A lot of them are probably people that that are starting to kind of reconsider this idea of a globe-shaped Earth. And as hard as that is to believe, it's the truth, But what's even more interesting, I guess, another layer or another aspect to this is that because the idea of a flat Earth is so frowned upon and so, poo-pooed by so many people, right? Disregarded as complete and total BS, like ridiculous, ridiculous, silly ideas. Their numbers are growing. It's like a wave. We live in a time when that is happening. I guess that's my point today, is that, we do have to deal with this idea of like censorship and all that kind of control over what is talked about, what is allowed to be talked about. And in lieu of all of that, regardless of how much effort Google and YouTube are putting into silencing the Flat Earth movement, it's still growing exponentially. And the people who are starting to believe, the converts to the Flat Earth movement, are kind of afraid to talk about it. So there's a very great likelihood that people that believe the Earth is flat, okay, or at least are starting to doubt the information they've been given about a spherical globe Earth, but they're not going to talk to you about it because they know that you are not going to agree with them, or you're going to ridicule them, or you're going to ostracize them, right? And this is happening. This is truly happening with people. I mean, just in my own personal experience, just having mentioned the Flat Earth movement in that episode I did a while back, I think it was one of my thought experiments or something. The reaction that I got from people was one of just total disbelief. Like, no, this is not real. But I was not saying I thought it was real. I was just bringing it up, kind of like I'm doing today. I'm just talking about it, But like I said, it's not so important to me anymore, like whether people I know or something are willing to at least consider the idea of the Earth actually not being a globe, not being a sphere, right? But what is important to me is the idea that this issue is now on the table, and you have this culture of scientists, like I said, who are kind of being challenged on their beliefs for the first time, really, collectively. Not just one specific guy with one specific idea, but the whole institution of scientists, the institution of science on planet Earth, is under attack, and these scientists find themselves having to defend their position for the first time. It's really quite something to consider when you really think about it. And I guess I'm the kind of person who sees the connection between, I guess now, stand-up comedy, the right to express yourself in the public space, and the right to express your belief of whether the Earth is flat or not, because as far as I'm concerned, we should all be free to at least speak about things openly and investigate ideas. I think that's more important than any one issue, It's a sign of the times, I guess, and a worrisome one, at that. But it also has that whiff to me, knowing my history, knowing the history of World War II a little bit. There's this whiff of fascism, and that's the word, and it's blowing through America right now. This weird kind of spirit of fascism that I can recognize, and I can actually see it now playing out. And that makes me worry about where we're headed in America. It really does. And I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I've expressed that before. I voted for neither candidate in the last election. I'm not interested in politics really anymore. It's really more about the social consequences of things, and I guess the changes that I'm watching take place. I'm not sure what they mean. I'm not sure where it's headed, but it sure does seem a lot like the very beginnings of, early Germany, 1935, like what was going on before World War II, what was going on before Hitler came into power, what was going on before all of that change came. And folks, let me tell you, doesn't bode very well for guys like me. Okay, I mean, I'm on the first list of people probably to go down, when that wave of fascism really starts to get a foothold here in America. It probably won't work out very well for me. So I shouldn't laugh. It's really not funny, but I don't know. Pray for me, especially when that hour comes, because by all indications, as far as I can tell, here in America, we're on the fast track to some major change, a major shift. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure if it's fascism. I'm not sure what you'd want to call it, but I'll tell you, I can feel it coming. There's definitely change coming in the United States, and maybe not all bad. Maybe some of it is good, but I don't know. It's a sign of the times. It's the times we live in. When you see the First Amendment, being challenged and being kind of systematically dismantled by the powers that be, or by people who do have their finger on the pulse of, social communication, social media, whoa, what's really going on? What does this mean? Nobody really knows now, do we? We don't know the future, but pay attention, folks. I have a feeling the next couple years are going to be really interesting. And I can say this, just in case you doubt, the information I shared with you about the Flat Earth movement really starting to grow, look into it yourself and you'll see what I mean. Especially, there's this guy, his name is Mark Sargent, and he releases videos about the Flat Earth. He's one of the first. He was like a pioneer in the modern Flat Earth movement, and he's kind of, I guess, seen right now as the guru, the leader of that movement. Him and maybe a handful of other people, but really him, And I gotta say, his Flat Earth videos on YouTube are actually pretty interesting, and they're not so far out. When you watch a couple of his videos, you can kind of get why people would be latching on to this idea as much as they are right now. So maybe when you're bored or something, do yourself a favor and watch a couple of his videos and you'll see. But even if you just typed in something like the Flat Earth movement is growing, type that into Google and you'll see. It's really strange. It's, where it'll be in 5 years. Wow, I don't know. It may be to the point, in 5 years, would I be surprised if they were actually starting to change textbooks in schools? about whether the Earth is a sphere or not, or globe. I don't know. Possibly, quite possibly. At the rate that movement is growing, I wouldn't really be surprised if by, let's say, the year 2025, children are no longer being taught that the Earth is definitely a globe or a sphere. You may laugh at me when I say that, but like I said, get into it yourself. You'll find out, you'll see. It's really a phenomenon. It's really kind of amazing. And it's also, like I said, a sign of the times. In this time of confusion and, there's no real way to know what's true and what's false. It's all very confusing, and it's designed to be that way, unfortunately. So, I've been talking for a little while here. I'll probably go right ahead and leave it here for today. But you'll be hearing from me again very soon, I promise. Vacation time is over, I think. And, it's been wonderful. Just getting all the sleep I need. I can't express it enough. But anyway, this is Mike Bostwick from Pipewire Records signing off. And remember, folks, if you want to keep what you've got to give it away. Take it easy.